Hi, it's been a while since I made a video on the very popular Luxe Minipeak II, an ideal backpacking, possibly cycle touring, bushcraft tent for 1/2 people. Now there's the new Minipeak XL, which is, as you would expect, slightly bigger. It's also got a stove jack built in as well, so it could be ideal for people that want to have a stove in the tent. And this is more suitable for 2/3 people. So I'm going to put up both of these tents. We're going to have a look how they feature and how they compare for the hiker, backpacker, bushcrafter and cycle tourist. And so straight out of the box, there's the Minipeak II and there's the XL. You can see a comparison of their sizes. They're roughly the same diameter and the XL is definitely a bit longer. But I shall put the packed weights and diameters on the screen now. So there you have it. On my right I have the Minipeak II, just roughly pegged out with the 4 corner pegs, and the XL the same on this side, ready for the pole to go in. Now you don't tension it straight away, you put the pole in first, get the pole at the right height, and then you tension the 4 corners, and that is the basic structure installed. Then the rest of the pegs just go for tidying it up. At the front of there we've got the inners for both of them, the remaining pegs, and 2 tubes of seam sealant. The material the shelters are made from is PU coated, so there's no need to worry too much about seam sealing, but the seam sealant works quite well where the main pressure point is, which is of course at the peak of the pole. A couple of little tips for you. These pegs, when you're putting them into the ground, they're often called X pegs, Y pegs, V pegs, depending on the shape of the crown of the peg there. When you're trying to put them in with your hand all the time, it can leave quite a mark on the hand, and obviously even when you use your foot, if you've got soft footwear, it can be quite painful. So if the ground is hard and tough and you really want to get the peg in deep, which obviously makes sense with any type of shelter, my top tip is to see if you can pick up a walking stick ferrule from a hardware shop really, or a shoe repair is usually the places to pick them up. This is a thick rubber cap, and in the bottom of it, if you choose the right one, you have a little metal disc which obviously protects the bottom of the walking pole, the walking stick rather. If you invert that and put that over the top of the peg, you can apply as much pressure as you like onto the peg to push it into the ground nice and safely, and lo and behold, it doesn't damage your hand. So that's a really useful tip, particularly with these type of pegs. The next tip is to do with the pole. The recommended pole for both these shelters is the Luxe 163 pole, which can be seen here. Now, as you can see, the pole has a fairly narrow tube diameter, and naturally in soft grass that will sink quite easily. The other side of it is at the other end of the pole, you have the same pressure point against the cap of the shelter. The top tip that we found from experience with ourselves and other customers is to take a tennis ball, cut it in half, and when you erect the shelter, make sure you put the pole into the tennis ball cap like that at one end, and the same for the other end when it's against the top of the shelter. And this actually prevents the pole from sinking, because the danger is with any of these single pole shelters, once the pole sinks even an inch or so, the whole tension of the shelter is lost. So that's one tip. The other tip is if you're not keen to use a pole and you are a walking pole user like this, for example, using something like these Lecky poles, there are other products on the market which will link a pair of poles together and provide you with a very strong, stable support. So it saves you having to carry another pole just by using a pair of walking poles. And naturally with the walking poles, because they have the domed end to them, most products are very similar to this. It will help with sinking into the ground and obviously protecting the top of the shelter as well. So there's a couple of tips for you. Have a look. If you're a walking pole user, there are a whole variety of these available to use to link a pair of poles together. Anyway, let's get back to putting the tent up. So let's now pop the pole in.
Once the single pole is correctly installed, along with the additional 4 pegs, we can see the shelters take shape. Incidentally, they both have 2 vents at the peak above the doors, 2 guying points at the side, plus a hanging loop should you wish to support them with an external frame or from a tree. They both benefit from 2 doors, front and rear, which is perfect when ventilation is required on a hot day. The Minipeak XL is unique in having a stove vent designed to be used with the supplied stove jack. Now let's see how much space we have inside the shelters. Using a Helinox light cot, which is 185 centimeters long, and a Helinox chair one, you can get a sense of scale. Using the same products inside the Minipeak XL, it's easy to see the space difference between the 2 models. Taking it a stage further, let's now put in the Helinox cot once again back into the shelters, along with a large frame mountain bike. Clipping the supplied inner into each shelter leaves half the footprint for storage and gear. But of course, don't forget that the inner can be dropped easily during the day, giving you the whole floor area for relaxing. Now, let's add that large framed mountain bike once again and see how much space is left.
Well, I hope that's given you an idea of some of the features on the Luxe Minipeak II and the Luxe Minipeak XL. As you saw when I got in this shelter, certainly when I had the push bike, I'm 6'2" and the push bike is on a large frame, not a standard frame. It was a bit tight to get into the sleeping area. But don't forget, during the daytime, you can unhook the sleeping nest, drop it down and use that as flooring as well. And you may not be wanting to use a nest at all, depending on obviously where you're going. But fantastic, really good value for money shelter. The XL has the additional advantage of the stove jack as well, should you be a winter camper and have a small stove you want to put in there. As I say, it has the same feature in the sense that you can drop the inner and have the whole floor area during the daytime, and should you be cycle touring, as you can see, you can get a very large bike in there with the panniers and the usual accessories and still have plenty of space to sleep 1, 2, possibly 2 people and an animal, a dog or a child or whatever. They're both excellent value for money tents, not the lightest tents in the world certainly, but certainly from a practical point of view, very, very easy to pitch, very low profile and will shed the wind quite nicely. Finally, the only other thing to mention is they both come with some seam sealing liquid, or seam sealing tube rather, and you're advised to seam seal around the high tension areas, which of course would be the crown area down the line across the horizontals and around the other side, because when the tent is obviously pitched and the guy ropes are all installed, it's quite a taut pitch and all the pressure is on the top of the crown of the shelter. So it's always belt and braces to apply some seam sealant there as well, so you're sorted. However, that's everything I can think of saying about the Minipeak series, the Minipeak II and the Minipeak XL. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks very much for watching.